All right, and we are live. Welcome
Oh my
everyone
god.
to Park Notes. I have with me Robin Waldun. This is
Hello,
gonna be
hello,
awesome,
hello.
dude. I don't even know. So, I mean, you're of the YouTube channel Robin Walden. Is that right?
Yes, it used to be like I started this back in 2017. Used to be called the Quirky Inquiry,
Oh,
and
okay.
then back then I was like studying science and mathematics and whatnot, and I was just kind of like, can I make science-related videos that are going to be interesting to watch? Because I was like bored out of my mind in my chemistry classes. So I was like, science has to be fun.
Hmm.
But then one thing led to another, and then got into the humanities, became obsessed with it, and then like eventually declared a literature and French major. And then I changed my channel name just simply to my name because I'm like, there's so much more than just like a quirky inquiry into things.
Hmm.
But now it's more aligned with the humanities. So yeah, that's essentially like a super short history of
Yeah.
where I'm at.
Yeah, like years and years condensed down to just that. Well, dude,
Yeah,
I'm stoked to have you on because I think we have. I'm thinking we're probably going to have a lot of overlap in our audiences, and
totally.
if not, if people don't know who you are, which would be surprising to me if they know me, but we talk about a lot of the same stuff from a little bit different angles, but still life of the mind type stuff, Mortimer Adler type stuff, notebooks, commonplace books. So definitely check out Robin's stuff if you guys are unfamiliar with him. And I don't know, are you cool talking about Substack too?
Yeah, of course.
So on Substack, your mug of insights, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then you tell like what are you writing over there? Tell the audience.
So it's kind of confusing because like it started with because Substack came online I think around 2019. That's when it really started gathering steam and
Yeah.
investors and all that stuff. So it started off as a pretty simple. It's a simple newsletter platform, but now they're adding reels and notes into it. I don't know what they're
Yeah.
doing there, but for me, a Mug of Insight started as a bit of a like a side project because I set up a microphone. I'm just going to talk into it for 15 minutes. It was originally intended to be a podcast,
Hmm.
like a podcast sort of newsletter thing. So I've sent people voice recordings of notes from what I've been reading or like interesting considerations. So it's like a low effort project, but every post started gathering steam when I announced it on YouTube, and then maybe like within the first week, like 2,000 people signed up for the free newsletter. And I'm
Whoa,
like,
dude,
oh my
that's
god,
huge.
I
Yeah.
know. It's like this is crazy. I'm just like, so you're saying I can send emails straight to these people
Hmm.
while bypassing an algorithm? So I started thinking to myself, I love the Wes Anderson film, The French Dispatch. I love
Mhm.
The New Yorker. I love that kind of editorial feel, and I
Mhm.
sort of really like envision myself, with dark spectacles, with a quirky tweed suit, sitting in an office, chewing on the end of
Wow.
a pencil. It's like I'm the editor of a magazine. So starting a magazine was like the main motivation, and that's why the aesthetics of the Mug of Insights is very much like a magazine from the 70s or something. So it's
Mhm.
got like quirky illustrative art. The voice is a little bit like it's got interesting thoughts in there if you dig deep enough, but the overall theme is let's wear our learning lightly
Hmm.
and let's just integrate life experience with all the stuff that we've read. And then I think, at least for me, it gave the work a pretty accessible quality. So recently I started this crazy project where I wanted to write about, because my specialization when I was in college was literary theory. So I thought to myself, it informs a lot of the ways that we read
Mhm.
these lesser known theories like for example, my major obsession was Jacques Derrida and the French post-structuralists,
Yeah.
and I thought to myself, that informs so much of how we look at the world right now. For example, when we read something in the media, our immediate instinct is to contextualize it in a larger discourse. And for example, we read something now, we're so used to the sort of post-structuralist thinking that
Hmm.
we can't help but to doubt meaning. So meaning itself is starting to kind of disintegrate. And then on Substack as well, there's so many posts just about something like Sabrina Carpenter's recent album cover.
Yeah.
You can look at that album cover
Yeah.
and you can write a whole like Substack article about it. It's like that's really interesting.
Mm.
So I thought to myself, I'm going to start this crazy long project. Basically, every article is going to be about 3,000 to 4,000 words. I'm going to write in the most accessible voice possible, like a popular pop philosophy writer using that
Yeah.
kind of voice. Just like on today's little jaunt through the countryside of literary history, like it's that kind of voice.
Yeah.
And that, with the original vision of starting a magazine, it gradually evolved over time. I used to do a weekly column where I just write down something I've learned that week, and it gradually gathered steam. And now we've accumulated over 21,000
Yeah.
like readers.
Insane.
And yeah, and then it's been a really fun thing. And I find writing to be a lot easier than like hopping on camera.
So much
It's like
easier.
similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Well, let me ask you a little bit about the move to the humanities. How, I mean, those are two different sides of the brain or whatever, right? But
Yeah.
you jumped into the humanities and then you jumped into continental philosophy on top of that, right? So it's humanities, but it's even more left side of the brain, humanities, right? So it's like literary theory and Derrida is like, holy cow, that's out there. How did that happen? What was the spark that like started that or lured you over into the dark side?
I think we're operating on retrospective bias here a little bit. You know, in
Mhm.
retrospect, the narrative is so clear. But, you know, now when I describe myself to people, I'm just like, I'm just a dilettante who loves to read everything
Mm,
without realizing that I've accidentally wandered into literary theory. I
yeah.
mean, might have been the same in your case. You
Mm,
don't just wake up one day and decide, I'm gonna be this.
mhm,
But you kind of wandered into it. You pursue whatever curiosity that tickled your fancy. So the thing that really bugged me. So I got into like this selected science school when I was back in 11th grade, and then in the 10th grade, I had this like fantasy of becoming like a theoretical physics kind of
mm,
person. So I
sure.
like, I want to do advanced mathematics. I want to deal with the questions of the universe. I want to discover dark matter. It's like, what the fuck is dark matter? Like, I really want to know that.
Yeah.
And then wandered into it in the 11th grade, discovered that I was like absolutely garbage at doing any mathematics. I can do
Mm,
basic, like trigonometry and all
yeah.
that stuff. But when it gets to like integral calculus or like when it gets to these really esoteric mathematical concepts, I really, really struggled. And chemistry is something that just didn't make any sense to me. So I'm like,
Mm,
okay, that was shot. So what's next? And now what started to interest me, I think my first loving philosophy might have been it was Derrida later,
mm.
but at first it was Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Yeah, sure.
And then like I took a so on top of all the science stuff, I took a course called English language here in like the curriculum here.
Hmm.
So English language is essentially linguistics. So we were analyzing discourse particles and parallel sentences, and we're analyzing declarative sentences, interrogative sentences. So like really nerdy linguistic
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And we're analyzing passages from Jane Austen to like Chaucer to like Beowulf. I'm like, this is fantastic. I'm like,
Mm,
why didn't anyone tell me anything about this? So that sort of interesting language, I think it started to bubble and balloon,
mm,
and that just sent me down a rabbit hole. And in English language, you're not required to read a source text, but every time my teachers would recommend a text like Beowulf or Jane Austen, I would go and buy the novel and read it that night. So it
yeah.
kind of started brewing this really deep love for literature. And then eventually what started happening was this passion started to snowball so much. And I'm like, it's untenable for me to keep studying chemistry and whatever,
Mm,
advanced mathematics. So I dropped out of all of them. Besides like physics, I can do a little bit. And then basic mathematics, I can do a little bit. So I kept 2 STEM courses, but the rest of it was like philosophy,
mm,
history, and then linguistics. So I took a full load of like humanities subjects, and as I was interpreting historical documents and as I was kind of getting into this like literature business, the question of language really bugged me because because it's just sometimes I would interpret a literary passage like Jane Austen, like that was one of the first novels I've ever read, and I was just asking myself like, how do I know that I know what that means? I mean, it's a
mm.
fairly basic question,
Yeah.
but if you really think about it, it's like, okay, 5 different people can have 5 different interpretations, and high school English classes are so bad that they're like, "Oh yeah, it's fine. Whatever you can interpret is going to be
Right.
your interpretation." But I wanted to like find out like what is the mechanics behind meaning,
Mm,
and that inevitably shifted me down a dark side of continental and structuralist philosophy. And it was like this obsessive effort of like months where I would shut myself, like my family went on vacation. And I was like, and I would just sit in my room. I'm like, okay, I don't understand a single thing about Jacques Derrida. I don't know a single thing about this guy.
Hmm.
His name sounds cool.
That's right.
And his books sound rather impressive to read. So I think it all started with like from a point of vanity. I'm like, I'm going to be the one to understand Derrida.
Hmm.
But I only started understanding him like 2 weeks ago. It's just like, it's been
That's
like,
awesome.
what, 6 years in a process. And I still feel like I barely scraped the surface. And then that sort of obsession with language eventually led to me declaring a literature major. And that literature major, I'm like, if I really want to understand the post-structuralists, I better pick up their language because there are a lot of wordplays and double entendre and then all that stuff that you can't really read in English.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked up a French major, fumbled my way through a French major, and eventually I got to a point where I could read in French. It's like, okay, the world is open.
Hmm.
And then that ability to reading French and my later sort of sidetrack into, which we can talk about in a second, into this field of study called post-critique, really just cemented like my passion for literary theory. Like, how do we read? Like, what is the mechanism behind how we interpret meaning, how we make sense of texts, and how we make sense of the world around us? Because whatever it is, language encapsulates a lot of the world.
Yeah.
Like, you read a street sign, and if the street sign is in a slightly different color, the meaning is completely different. All the traffic would go into a shitstorm if one traffic light stops functioning. So that sort of relationship between meaning and language, I think that's what got me into like literary theory as a discipline.
That's huge, man. That's awesome. There's so many more things. So I'll let the audience know we are planning to do a Parker's Pensies. I say Pensies. Robin would say Pensée.
I say Pensies. Let's say Pensies.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Let's keep it in the same register.
That's good. Yeah, I like that. So we're gonna have a deeper, philosophical one over there for the super nerds. Here we're gonna just kind of see where the conversation goes, but definitely want to talk some of our shared interest in the life of the mind, intellect type realm. So
Totally.
we want to hear from you guys, and any super chats we're going to split right down the middle. So that's like the fair way to do it. So if you got a question for Robin, you got a question for me, drop them in the comments. Hopefully we'll get a bunch, but we will give priority to the super chats. So with that in mind, let's take our first question here. This one's from Matthew. Would love to hear about the life of the mind and note taking, how they intersect. Is there a philosophy of note taking that has been helpful in retaining your studies? Robin, let me kick it to you first. What do you think about that?
Sure. I know we both bang on about commonplace books for like 20 years at a time, but I think over time my note taking strategy shifted a lot more. So when I first started, I definitely took a lot of notes the way that you would in physical notebooks. I have like a stack of like Moleskine or Lechten. Is it Lechten? I don't even know.
It might be Leuchtturm, but Leuchtturm, something like that. I don't know. And Moleskine is probably Moleskine. I have no idea. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just Moleskine got some of the most terrible paper quality. They're never consistent.
They went down. Yeah, they went down. That's why.
Anyway, but that's besides the point. Sure. But we can talk for like 2 hours just on notebook brands. But anyway, it's like dudes talking about cars.
That's right.
But I definitely started with like a very romantic kind of Renaissance scholar. All my notebooks need to be leather bound. I need to write things in a cursive font, in a fountain pen. This is going to be like the most immaculate thing. My children are going to see this one day. They're going to be like, grandfather was a great man or anything. But I think as my career grew, I think I stumbled upon, I'm sure you're familiar with Mortimer Adler.
Yeah.
He's syntopical reading.
Yeah.
And so syntopical reading at first, it's a very, like in Mortimer's definition, it's a very complicated kind of construction. And to me, like sometimes it even seems excessively complicated how Mortimer would construct a syntopicon. Yeah. So I thought to myself, okay, let me distill the syntopicon or syntopical reading down to its bare essence, which is you find ideas in a text instead of instead of taking a whole page of notes to support that one idea.
Hmm.
And then hunting for ideas is kind of based on a prior understanding of the text already. So you probably need to run through the text a few times, but my note taking has definitely simplified over time from like gathering pages of notes to simply maybe from one book, I have a few paragraphs
Mm.
in my syntopicon under certain themes like love,
Yeah.
like education, ideas, and it maps it out like in my Notion page so that every time I want to think about an idea or I want to apply a piece of evidence to a piece of writing, it's in a library of ideas instead of a library of full page notes because
Hmm.
I virtually never review any of the notes that I take in those like really long strokes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely simplified. What about you?
Yeah. For me, it started because when I was in college, I was doing exercise science, and it was cool. I just want to be jacked. I want to be a bodybuilder. It was stupid, but
That's not stupid.
well, I was obsessed with it. It was goofy. It had all sorts of bodybuilders on my wall, so I could be
Mm.
motivated. It was weird. My dad's like, "Hey, are you okay, man? What's with all these like naked dudes on your wall?" So, anyways, I discovered philosophy my junior year of college and realized it was too late to switch majors. But I would meet up with the philosophy majors and we'd talk philosophy and apologetics and theology and all sorts of stuff. So that led me into a whole different realm. And I would listen to philosophers or like public theologians, public intellectuals, and they could just rattle off quotes like crazy. And I'm like, I don't know how they're doing that. They must have different memories than I have. But I'm going to start writing down my favorite quotes in a notebook, and then I'm going to reflect on those and commit them to memory. And then I discovered when I went to my first master's degree, there's this thing called a commonplace book, and that's what it is. And a lot of theologians have done it throughout the years, and it was fun just to find myself doing something that some of these real intellectual giants were doing. It was really exciting, and I've noticed a ton on my YouTube channel. People say, "Is that what that's called?" I've been doing that myself. I thought I'd invented that, and everyone gets excited about it. Like, there's other people like us who do this, who collect these quotes. So it started like that.
Stamp collecting.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that helped me a ton in my master's degree because I had tons and tons of quotes already in these notebooks. So when it came time to write my theology work, a lot of theology is stringing quotes together. It's kind of like the literary view of writing papers. It's like, let me back it up with this saint or this theologian or this philosopher. Look what they said. So I already had those. So I was able to write my papers really easy. And then from there, uh, I came up with 4 different types of commonplace books, and based on some history too. I've been reading books on commonplace books, so my audience will probably be sick of it. But four basic kinds. Just the manuscript commonplace book. That's where you put the chunks of quotes, and then you're manuscripting out your own thoughts, your own papers, your own exegesis right there in the text. Then you have a treasury commonplace book. That's just a storehouse for your quotes. And then you can have a general or a specific. If it's general, it's just all your favorite quotes in one spot. If it's specific, then it's like, this is going to be philosophy of mind, or this is going to be a Derrida commonplace book. Anyone talking about Derrida, his own quotes, blah, blah. But then from there, I've kind of even graduated on more towards what you're talking about. I call them compendiums,
Compendium. Yeah.
it's a compendia, but I'm an American
Yeah.
swine, so I say compendiums. Or they are plural, compendia. But a compendium is more interested in the information than the
Gotcha.
quotation. So it's hunting for ideas, and if you need the quotation, just put down the page number and go find it again. So now I'm doing kind of both. Now I'm doing, if I want to be an expert in something, I should know what the experts have said, and I should be able to rattle off the ideas at will. So I have a compendium for the philosophy of mind, and I have a commonplace book for the philosophy of mind. And together, it's like, yeah, I've been collecting and sourcing quotes, and I've been storing my own ideas, but also abstracting the information to get just the juice, just the meat of it. So if I want to reflect on it, oh yeah, I've abstracted out the idea myself, which helps me learn, and it's easy to reference. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think what I'm calling compendia or compendiums is similar to the Syntopicon.
Yeah.
And I mean, Syntopicon of Mortimer Adler is one of my favorite books of all time.
Oh, it's
Um,
great.
just so
It's
good.
just like, oh boy.
For the folks at
But
home,
have you
it's the 102 greatest ideas. I guess maybe he adds a couple more to the second edition. It could be, but
they're very hard to come by nowadays. I couldn't
yeah,
find a single copy.
yeah. My wife just
Yeah.
found one for $3 at a estate
Get
sale.
out.
Yeah, I have like
Get out of here.
it's crazy. Yeah, I have the older ones from this great books collection right here, and so I have like 4
Oh
or 5
god.
copies because anytime I find them, I'm like, yep, I'm taking that. I'll give that to somebody. Yeah,
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Have
yeah,
you ever tried like I don't know. I was like, there's a weird German Zitokatzen,
dude.
like the note card,
They're all gonna
note
give it to
cards.
us in the comments. I say Zettelkasten. For a while, I thought people
Zetokatzen,
were
yeah.
messing with me because it looks like my last name, and I'm like, "Is that the German way?" I didn't understand. Everyone kept because they wouldn't ask me. They would just go Zettelkasten question mark, and I'm like, "No, I'm Case, not Zettel." Like, no, but it looks like Case almost Zettelkasten.
Yeah. I
Um,
think
yeah,
I think I'm doing a bit of both. I have a digital syntopicon, which I just think is like for creating content or like writing on Substack is a lot
yeah,
easier.
yeah. I have one of
But
those too. As a notebook, but
maybe in
yeah.
the background you see that cache box.
Uh-huh.
That's my kind of that's for a very specific purpose because I also have a vested interest in kind of linguistical devices and
Sure.
weird rhetorical terms. So whenever I see a really weird word from an old book,
Hmm.
it's like there's this word like that fell out of fashion, but in certain boating communities they still use it. Gongoozling.
Okay, that's
Have you heard of
awesome.
that one?
I have not, but
So
I'm gonna add it to my personal dictionary. Yeah.
gongoozling means you are staring off into space doing absolutely nothing.
Hmm.
And then that was a term that like I think fell out of fashion in like the 18th century or something. Like I don't know the precise details,
Okay.
but in certain boating communities, because they still do a lot of gongoozling,
Hmm.
that term actually survived. So I'm like, okay, that's fantastic. So
Yeah.
it's not going to go into my syntopicon. It's not going to go in here. But I just got these note cards, and I'm like, I'm just gonna have a Mr. Waldun's kind of weird bank of ideas and words.
Yeah.
So whenever I want to review some of these weird words, like okay, that's diacope, or that's I don't know, polyptoton, or
Hmm.
all these weird rhetorical devices. I like to collect them, like stamp collecting. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
stored them physically in a cache box.
Hmm. That's awesome. Oh, so
Yeah.
I have something I call my personal dictionary,
Yep.
and when I come across a word in a book, I will put a box around it if it's a word I've never heard before. If I've never heard it before, I'm putting the definition right there in the margins, so the next time I find it, I can remember what it means. If I've seen it before and I can kind of recall it, I'll still come back and put it especially if I really like it, I'll put that in my personal dictionary, and I give the etymology of the word, a couple definitions of the word, and sometimes I'll even put the whole sentence where I found it
Hmm.
in the entry as well, so I can remember what I've been reading. And I call it silly philology when I find those kind of words. I think he's still
Silly
there. I think we still,
philology.
yeah, silly
Yeah, I'm
philology.
just plugging the camera in. It's
Yeah.
running out of battery. Yeah.
So like one of my favorites is trivial. When I first learned
Mm.
about the trivium, I was like, man, logic, grammar, rhetoric, the three foundational liberal arts, the foundational three of the seven liberal arts, that's really important. And I was like, I wonder if trivial is related to the trivium. And I looked up the etymology and it is. And I'm like, stupid English has switched the word. Because when you say, hey, don't be so trivial, you mean don't be pedantic, don't get into unnecessary tedium. But being trivial means referring to grammar and logic and rhetoric. If anything, in
Mm.
a debate, you need to get more and more trivial,
Yeah.
not less trivial. And so I'm really interested in how our words degrade and flip and switch. So like being awesome is good, to have some awe or to inspire some awe is good, but being full of awe is bad. Awful. If
Awful.
you're awful,
Oh
like
my god.
awful,
Yeah.
right? But awe is a good thing. So
Yeah.
like people used to refer to God as being awful, because he's inspired full, awe. So silly philology is something I similar to your
No, I
box
love
there.
that.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm actually writing a chapter in my book right now about like coming to terms with the author.
Mm,
And I referenced the case. I was reading a seminar on Nicholas Milbanche,
yeah.
and he kept saying awesome in it. So when I first started reading, I was like, that word just doesn't fit. It's just
Hmm.
like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like the nature of reality is awesome. I'm like,
Bro, it's
what are you,
awesome.
what,
Yeah.
bro? It's like,
Yeah.
what are you, Gen Z or a gym
Yeah.
bro?
Yeah.
But then like awesome, I think it really had a different etymology. But
Yeah.
yeah. Do
Yeah.
we
I
have
love
another
that.
question? I
Yeah, we
think
got one.
we can
There
just
we go.
keep going.
Yeah. So, would love to hear you two talk about Byung-Chul Han. And
Oh
I
God.
asked you about this too. It's just recently he has popped up into my life. I have to remind myself to take myself out of the analytic philosophy world and step into what the popular culture is calling philosophy and looking at as philosophy. And it's helpful having my audience actually being like, "Hey, have you heard of this or that?" I just heard of this dude. I think probably because of Jared Henderson, and people are like, "Hey, Jared, you're just like a watered down whatever," and he's like, "That's actually a compliment." So I saw that you talk about him. So can you just give us like a elevator pitch? Like, who is? I'm going to say his name wrong. Probably Byung-Chul Han. I think he's a crean philosopher, right?
Yeah, I can't even say the name right. Byung-Chul Han.
Okay.
I think like they translated it into Mandarin Chinese as something like Han Bingzhe,
Okay.
but that's not the Korean pronunciation. But
Hmm.
anyway, so I did my dissertation on Byung-Chul Han for my honors thesis, and so essentially, like any philosopher, there are different phases of his work, but most people know him through his pamphlets, which is like written in this really accessible style. Every line is like an aphorism. Like he's
When you
very
say
quotable.
pamphlet, I just looked him up recently, and someone else mentioned pamphlet. Do you mean like a
Yeah.
literal like a handout, like pamphlets folded multiple times, or what do you mean by
No,
pamphlet?
it's just no. His books are just super short. It's like
Gotcha. Okay.
he's really like the Burnout Society, for example. It's like 50 pages. It blew my
Okay.
mind. I was like,
Wow.
how do you argue anything 50 pages? I'm just
Hmm.
like, to me, a chapter with 3 pages. I'm like, I wouldn't call that philosophy. I was like hyper skeptical when I went
Sure.
into it.
Okay.
And then I realized this guy is like, I think he ran away from home and lied to his parents about studying engineering and went to Germany. I think Freiburg University, and he just studied philosophy instead of engineering. So
Hmm.
he went through the whole gauntlet, and then he actually did his dissertation on Heidegger,
Hmm.
and I think his dissertation is called Heidegger's Hand, where he just went on this really like it's this book hasn't been translated into English as of yet, I think. So from a secondary source that I've read for my dissertation, it went into this kind of like I don't even know how to describe it without losing myself, but it's essentially re-articulating the concept of like within Heidegger. I don't know much about Heidegger, but
Yeah.
like the I don't even know. I'm not going to say anything that gets me into trouble for people who do know about Heidegger.
Well, so
But
is it
essentially,
Heidegger's like philosophy of technology, or is it more his other philosophy, like of being and things
oh,
thingy?
I think of being, and that really
Okay.
informed a lot of his concepts and like the concept of positivity and negativity, and then how like reality discloses itself,
Hmm.
and then that informed a lot of his later works. And I think gradually he started coming out with these pamphlets that are written in these hyper concise,
Yeah.
concise sentences. And he's like, a lot of philosophers criticized him for being not argumentative at all,
Hmm.
because he doesn't present arguments. He kind of states things categorically, like
Yeah.
this is the case, and he goes on this kind of long rant about a thing. And then so there was a joke in one of his university commencement speeches. He basically said that my books are so condensed and so jam packed that some readers are forced to underline all of the sentences in my books because every line can be quoted.
Hmm.
Um, so I found that really interesting. And he also did a series called like Untimely Meditations. One's about the Chinese conception of shanzhai,
Hmm.
which means copying and forgery. But it's a completely different way of thinking. I'm actually thinking of making a video about this, is because we see the BYDs and the Chinese knockoffs doing better than the original.
Hmm.
So that comes from a fundamental concept of like, at least in Eastern philosophy, or at least in this shanzhai kind of way of viewing things, the copy is just as good as the original. So
Mhm.
there's that kind of through line that kind of differs from Western thinking of intellectual property. It's like the original is the best. So essentially, Burnout Society made his name, and he built upon that one concept. It's kind of like in one way, he's a brilliant like writing marketer. Like he
Hmm.
found one thing that really worked, and he in that book he tackled a lot about burnout, and he tackled a lot about identity, and then referenced a lot of like psychoanalytical cases where like identities need to be constructed negatively instead of positively, because now
Hmm.
we're trapped kind of in a society of positivity. And positivity doesn't mean we're all very happy and optimistic.
Right.
Positivity means we need to affirm things. We need to affirm who we are.
hmm
But then again, as we start to not have as many human connections, as social media and AI makes it easier and easier for us just to sit alone in a room, we no longer have that negative force to punch back at us, to solidly define who we are. You know, in a context of relationship, for example, when you enter a relationship, you don't really like it's fantasy to think that I'm going to build myself into the best person I could be and I'm going to enter a relationship. More often than not, you go into a relationship to get destroyed and deconstructed, and then you need to like figure out a way to reassert whatever it is that is you.
Hmm.
Like your true self gets revealed in the process of this push and pull. So I think a lot of people are afraid of that push and pull and afraid of being changed because they need to positively assert who they are. So what ends up happening is you end up having a lot of repetition. And you have a lot of repetition, which means you see something on the internet, you integrate it into your identity kind of positively. It's like, I could be that. I could be a gym bro. I could be someone who wakes up at 5 every morning. So you have all these positive traits without really realizing that whatever works for you needs to come from you overcoming some sort of external obstacle. But then again, we're starting to reduce the amount of external obstacles that we face. Because whenever you want something, Amazon Prime delivers it to your house within 4 hours. So there's very little resistance from the outside world that kind of forms how we would interact with the world. So that's another point of positivity and negativity. And basically positivity.
That point is so good. I want to jump in on. So
Sure.
I grew up wrestling my whole life, and so a lot of the cultural stuff I've been insulated from because I've got dudes yelling at me my whole life saying I'm gonna have to do push-ups if I do something wrong. No one's gonna help you out when you're out on the mat, but your teammates are like your brothers and sharpening you. Iron sharpens iron. So it was actually a pretty healthy give and take. And we would do something called adversity training because the world is kind of soft. And if you want to be mentally sharp and you want your body to be really sharp, then you have to put yourself in positions to make yourself overcome adversity. And it sounds similar to this negative aspect of, it's like carrying an extra weight and saying like, I'm gonna conquer with this as well. I'm gonna put myself in a position where I'm down 8 points against my opponent and there's only 30 seconds left. What am I gonna do? Stuff like that. So I am kind of a gym bro, and a little bit I'm like gym bro adjacent. I'm also like academia adjacent because I live in all these different weird worlds. But it's fun to see it, and it's fun to see how the wrestling community has still been embracing something like the wisdom tradition going all the way back. So, I find all these moral lessons, all these wise sayings, but they're from wrestling coaches who've learned them from their coaches all the way back. And so it's kind of cool when you have to abstract it and apply it to life, which is kind of fun for a philosopher to do. But I thought that was really fascinating when academia and some sports at least intersect.
Yeah, totally. And I think I recently started karate. I'm actually going to karate like tonight.
Oh, sweet.
And starting as a white belt, because a part of me is like, whatever happened to this idea of like people who have a life of the mind, who neglect their bodies. So you have these sickly intellectuals. It's like, I definitely brought into that for a little while until I started having all sorts of health problems. I'm like, this is like just not sustainable.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. There's a way of tackling pain that gives you a solid sense of confidence, because a lot of people think confidence is like, I puff my chest out,
right.
I'm going to go ask out my crush, all this kind of stuff. But in my experience, like confidence really comes from getting your ass kicked a few times.
Yeah.
So that you no longer fear getting your ass kicked. And then through that process, you really discover where you're at. So you're kind of, it's kind of like an antidote to Dunning-Kruger. So whenever you get hit by a real big obstacle, you break down, and then you emerge with where you're actually at.
Yeah. And you're still alive and everything's cool.
Yeah.
Like, I do jujitsu now. And so it's like, someone's just laying on my face with a sweaty gi, and you feel like you're not going to breathe, and you're like, I'll be all right. Well, we're cool now.
I'll be all right.
Yeah. Here's the next one here. Have either of you studied cognitive psychology for its principles in learning? If so, have you learned? What have you learned, and how have you implemented it? Well, let me jump in really quick, Robin. So
Go for it.
I haven't studied a ton. Usually what I get is from analytic philosophers who are studying this stuff, and then they'll talk about memory, and then we'll discuss it in papers in the philosophy of mind. And so it's kind of trickled down through analytic philosophy. Usually I have gone out and found some psychological research for the benefits of notebooks over digital and longhand note taking versus taking notes on a laptop. What I've found, and look, I'm probably biased too. I'm not a psychologist. I like the ones that agree with what I haven't found a ton of them. The ones I have found have happened to agree with me, but there's probably some kind of bias as well. And I usually don't put too much stock in psychological research because I see them get overturned all the time, right? And it's like, well, I didn't know enough to say this study was lacking because of its sample size or because of whatever parameters they used weren't the right ones. So I'm usually like, look, I have my own personal experience, and here's some psychological research. Take it with a grain of salt. Read it for yourself. Maybe I interpreted it wrong, but there's at least 2 of these studies. One of them is from Japan, and I linked it in my last video on compendiums. So check that one out. You can find those in the description. The one from Japan said that taking notes in a physical notebook led to higher retention of information and better recall. And it probably has to do with something about the tactile nature of it and the physical space of the notebook. For me personally, I usually can remember what side of the note, what side of the page I wrote the note on, or if I'm taking marginal notes in a book. Usually I'm like, I know it's on the right side, so I'm flipping through the book. Oh, there it is. Just that's how my brain works. I don't know if everyone's like that. The second psychological study said that taking notes, this is the pen is mightier than the keyboard, I think. Taking notes longhand with a pen and paper helped students. They did better on tests. They had better recall. They remembered and encoded the information better than those who took verbatim notes with their laptop, or probably took verbatim notes. So the difference there that the authors were suggesting was, when you take notes verbatim, you're kind of in a passive mode, just trying to receive like the words and just try to get them down exactly right. If you're taking notes longhand, you can't write fast enough to take them verbatim. So usually you have to start putting them in your own words. And what, some people say, what does that mean? Look, it just means putting it in your own words. You're not using the exact same words. You're getting the concept, you're getting the idea instead of the quotation. And in doing that, you're actually encoding the information while you're writing down the info. So those are 2 that I like. But Robin, you're a digital guy, so maybe you won't even like those at all.
No, I still have a big part. Like, I still retain a lot for physical note taking. I think it's just the nature of being portable, and because I like to work on a go a lot, and having a fast access to ideas, so I can keep up with the writing schedule on Substack and my newsletter, and also putting out videos consistently. I think there's a work mode and there's like a guilty pleasure kind of for myself kind of mode. So every morning I have this ridiculous routine of reading 2 pages of I'm reading Bozak right now, 2 pages of a French novel.
I wonder if
where
that's so good.
Yeah, where I would write down all the words that I don't know and all the grammatical structures that I don't know. For stuff like that, definitely physical. Like I can't stand to like get up at 5 and then type things out on my computer. So I love, like, for my self-directed learning, definitely physical. But yeah, in terms of cognitive psychology, I haven't done a ton of reading into cognitive psychology. Like I took 2 years of AP psychology when I was in high school, but that's about it. But like, you virtually don't learn anything in AP psychology. And I'm trying not to overreach. It's like we're both like humanities guys. We all love notebooks. We have our kind of respective phenomenological kind of experience with note taking. But if we were to overreach it into a scientific study, I feel like I would consult someone who studies psychology. And even though I might have some ideas about it, I might draw conclusions from it. Like I did a recent video on reading out loud versus reading in your head. Dug through like 10 psychology papers. And then and I was very hesitant to make any claims about it because I was like, I don't know how to read the data. It's like you wouldn't bring a psychology student to interpret Hegel for you. You wouldn't believe in anything they've ever said, right? So like the flip side is also true, because I see a lot of overreaching, especially people in like the humanities, for example, where they know a lot about history, for example, but then they overstep into philosophy and they start making all sorts of stupid claims. So I'm gonna claim like yeah, I'm just gonna declare I'm rather ignorant in that sector.
That's good. Yeah, so folks, a lot of people coming in here. We're going to answer your questions. We are prioritizing the super chats. So there's a lot of comments here. Can't see them all. I can see the super chats easier. So drop those in. I'm splitting those halfway with Robin here. So support our work by dropping some super chats, and I will try to find questions as they're coming in here. Here's one. What books do you recommend to get into philosophy? Robin, why don't you kick us off here?
I think I'll kick it off to you because philosophy
Okay.
is an auxiliary study of mine. Mine's
Yeah.
more like literary studies. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's what I want to see. I want to. One of my questions for you is favorite philosophers as well. For me, um, I keep going back and forth. Some people will say you need to just start with the primary text. Usually, I will say that. There are some good overview texts that will. It's a survey of Western philosophy will help you kind of start getting your bearings. So find a good one of those. Um, Paul Gould has a pretty good one actually. It's for Christian philosophy, but you don't have to be a Christian to read it. So yeah, you can Google Paul Gould. It's a co-edited book. I'm looking on my shelf and I can't find it right now. But I mean, you can start with like John Frame has a gigantic one, a history of Western philosophy and theology. That's another one. So you can get a good overview book. Just don't stop there. Just as you're reading through the history of Western philosophy, know that you can't treat each thinker with the respect that they need in a survey. And so if you're intrigued by Descartes, go and read Descartes. But don't say it's Descartes' fault that the West has fallen or the West, cracked objective truth. Like, come on, dude. Do you really think that this guy's a genius? He's an actual genius. Go and read his stuff. So
His works are really, really accessible. Like
seriously,
Meditations on First Philosophy. It
yeah,
reads like a journal. It's fantastic.
yeah. Or Discourse on the Method is even shorter, and it's like 5 chapters. So I would start with some of those primary texts. C.S. Lewis has an essay about reading old books, and he says most students that he was working with in his time at Oxford, they were too scared to go and read Plato for themselves. They thought, let me read a secondary text because he's such a great mind. And Lewis is like, look, that's commendable, but it's wrong because usually you're not going to be able to understand the secondary texts because they have all the isms that have developed about Platonism and such. So start with the primary text. So start with Plato's Republic. I know some people don't like that one. Start with the Euthyphro. That's a really accessible and easy and one of my favorite dialogues by Plato. And you'll see that he's kind of telling a story. The dialogue is like a mix between poetry and philosophy, and it was kind of the ceasefire between the two because they used to beef with each other. And the dialogue is like it's beautiful. So start with Plato. Yeah, jump in with Plato, and the Euthyphro is a great place. He's going to be debating the nature of goodness, so and justice. So that's what I would say. What do you think, Robin? So like, I want to hear personally, who's your favorite philosopher? Do you have one? That's an unfair question.
Oof.
Yeah,
that's like asking me to choose my if I were to have a bunch of kids, like who's your favorite kid? I'm like, fuck.
Right.
I'm inclined to say like because like as you get into philosophy, you have different phases of obsession.
Sure, yeah.
Currently, it might just I'm inclined to say Jacques Derrida.
Okay.
Because there's so much misreading out there of his works, and then what most people don't realize is that every book by Jacques Derrida is just a very creative, close reading of a certain work. A lot of people like look at deconstruction. You're just in there to deconstruct a text, but if you really pay close attention to what he's doing with all these so-called deconstructive readings, it was just later adopted into a method so that it could be taught at elite universities, but the primary texts are, for example, of grammatology, some beautiful readings of Rousseau and Plato. And for example, the postcard, it is entirely a reading of Freud and Plato. So all these works have such intricate, like, close readings, and as a lit major, I love close reading,
Hmm.
and it's just really interesting to see how his mind works, and I think that might have been a goalpost that I set for myself when I first started reading anything, which is like, okay, so this is how I approach getting into philosophy. You need to find someone that truly inspires you.
Hmm.
So a lot of people say start with Plato, like I still need to go back to Plato and read a bunch of his stuff.
Hmm.
But I think if you're trying to get into it to understand something,
Hmm.
I would pick someone who really fascinates you.
Hmm.
For example, if you want to read Alfred North Whitehead, whatever it is that fascinates you about him, you want to know more about Wittgenstein, you want to know more about like one figure out of this whole history of philosophy. And the beautiful thing with philosophy is that it is essentially a sustained dialogue.
Hmm.
There's that joke, every philosophy book ever written is a footnote to Plato.
Yeah.
And then
No, Whitehead.
eventually,
Yep.
yeah, exactly. Eventually, you're going to find yourself back reading the Republic or reading this or that. But now you have an aim to understand this figure that you're totally in love with.
Yeah.
So I think I stress love a lot because that has something to do with which we'll talk about in your Pensées episode, I think. That
Mhm.
has something to do about like reading as an affectation. You need to let the text transform you, and then from which can you deduce your own path into deeper inquiry. So the way I approached it is I'll pick someone that's really difficult. I know I don't have the reading levels to interpret it yet. It's like Foucault or like Derrida or
Mhm.
Deleuze, so one of these really intense figures. And I would find all the references in there and the bibliography and the recommended readings
Mhm.
that would eventually lead me to a whole body of like read Descartes, read Francis Bacon, read David Hume or John Locke, and then eventually you'll find your way back to the Republic or to the Symposium.
Mhm.
And then eventually, this is how I think most people would go about building their own reading lists. Because I don't know about you, but some people are very resistant to like, okay, I'm going to start from 1, 2, 3, and then eventually I'll get somewhere. But for me, yeah, it was very much like I start with someone that I'm totally in love with. And then knowing that philosophy is a giant discourse, from that point, I'm able to read, getting to Freud here, do a survey of Freud in 3 months or do a survey of Plato in a month. And then I can return to whatever it is that I was trying to work through.
Yeah.
And with that added context of having engaged with the original, it's such a pleasure to reread, for example, Derrida, now that I've practiced a bit of Plato.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that you said that. So when I would give reading tips back in the day on my old blog, I used to call this pulling the thread. It's like you're wearing a sweater and you start picking at it, but it keeps coming and it keeps coming and you keep pulling and pulling and eventually it's just your collar. You unwind the whole thing. But it's the same thing, and I think that's perfect. That's exactly right. So you can do a survey book if you have no idea about any philosophy, or check out a YouTube channel that talks about philosophy. Find someone that you're fascinated by, and then start pulling the thread. I just historically, this happened with me with a theologian named Cornelius Van Til and a public apologist philosopher C.S. Lewis. And like you said, you start falling in love with these people, and you're like, even if you don't agree with them, sometimes you just love to disagree with them. You're like, oh, I love it. He said it again. I can't believe it. And then you find, who is this person really like? Who do they admire? Who do they quote a lot, and who do they cite a lot? And who do they hate? So sometimes you read the people that they hate and you go, I think they got them wrong. I read that for myself. So like Van Til would always rail against Descartes, and I read Descartes for myself. I'm like, I don't think he's got Descartes right. And then from there I was just pulling the thread. So I think you're totally right, man. That's great.
And it's so interesting because it's also about developing a sense of judgment.
Mhm.
Because it's like if you just jump into one philosopher cold, if you're a beginner, it's really easy to just agree with that philosopher, and then it could potentially corrupt. It could potentially serve as a lens from
Mhm.
which you read everything else.
Yeah.
This is a major problem in literary criticism, where like first years and second years they produce what we call vulgar readings.
Mhm.
It's basically they learned something about Simone de Beauvoir. They learned, like, for example, feminist critique, or like Freudian critique, and then they use that as a lens to read the rest of the history of philosophy.
Yeah.
And then that to me is like a major danger, because the point here is you need to return to whatever it is that you've read before with context and
Yeah.
make up your own mind.
Right.
And I think that that's a quantum leap from taking everything in and just blindly agreeing with everyone, to the point where you could agree or disagree with the author. And I think that's what I'm trying to encapsulate in my videos, which is like, I'm not going to recommend. I normally don't do book recommendations unless I'm held at gunpoint, because I want people to really fall in love with who they love. I'm
Mhm.
here to provide the techniques and whatever mindset that you need, so you can go on your own little voyage. You can agree or disagree with whatever you're reading.
That's great, man. I think that's great. Let's see. So again, folks, people keep jumping in. We're taking your questions here, so drop a comment and I'm scrolling through. Let's see. Okay, here's one. So what kind of notes do you take as you read? I've just started taking different notes myself. It depends on the book. So I'm doing a read along of Dune right now on my Substack. And so my notes are going to be a little bit different because I've read Dune a bunch, 7 or 8 times, and I've listened to it on audiobook. So I know the book pretty well. I take some marginal notes, but I don't take as many marginal notes. Marginal notes being notes inside the book and around the margins, underlining, highlighting, symbols, all that stuff. I'm not taking as many of those because it's a novel. I don't take as many marginal notes in novels. You just don't really need to. And then I'm not writing down the quotes like I used to. It takes a long time. But I'd still want to do that because I think actually writing it will help. That's why I started this whole journey, is I wanted to be able to quote stuff to people and pass along quotes. So I still do that, but I'm writing down key themes from key pages, and I will just make a note of it on page 76, something like this. Like, we're just reading this part where one of the main characters is dying. I can't say anymore, but there's this hawk next to him, and the hawk is actually a symbol of a different family, and it is symbolic, and you wouldn't really notice it because Frank Herbert's subtle about it. So I'm like, oh, I haven't really noticed that before. I'm writing that down, and then I look back through my notes when I'm done reading the section, and I will make an outline because I'm going to write an essay on it. So that's been very helpful for me, is just outlining my notes like a psychopath as I go. It's all over. You're going to see all these arrows, but it makes sense to me. I don't care. This isn't for anyone else but me. And then I go back through and make order out of my chaos. And usually I can find some good philosophical theme because the book is really philosophical. Like you said earlier, you're reading one book and then you're coming back. Since diving more deeply into Plato's Republic recently, I've seen Dune as a response to Plato's Republic and the Philosopher King. I never would have known that.
That's
and
awesome.
No, I've never seen anyone else talk about it at all.
Wow.
Maybe I'm missing it, but he's definitely talking about the 4 cardinal virtues. He's personifying each 4, and then he's taking them away from his leader. So he's saying the leader doesn't have the virtues, but he's got courage. So it's cool, man. It's awesome. How about you, Robin?
I was just about to add, isn't that just the best part about reading? If you get super deep into one thing, it eventually explodes into everything.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I have it here. I don't think I do. No, I do this weird thing because I'm a big proponent of immersion as you read. So you wouldn't get distracted by because sometimes you read one quote or one sentence.
Yeah.
You sit there for an hour thinking about it. But then you're not reading a book. You're getting mad at yourself for not hitting your quota of however many books that you want to read. So so I'm a big proponent of like a 3-step process. So I love Mortimer J. Adler's analogy of inspectional reading. So inspectional reading, you essentially I'm talking about expository work here, whereas I think you talked about fiction with Dune. So with an expository work, because it's not really supposed to, sometimes they tell stories, but the main point here is the author's trying to tell you something. Yeah. So I would do an inspectional glance, and then as I'm going through my inspectional reading, I would look for signposts, and Adler called this propositions. So signposts are basically the linchpins that hold the chapter together. So in every chapter, there are a few key points being made. And because now I'm able to do this as I'm inspecting a chapter. But earlier on, inspectional reading and this hunting for proposition thing, they're two separate processes.
Hmm.
So, but nowadays I would just glance through a chapter and then I would underline what I think are the linchpins of the chapter.
Hmm.
And then after I've read through the chapter, like immersively without stopping, so I have like a grand overview of the chapter, I would flip the book to the back of the book and I would create like a skeletal outline of the chapter with a few of my like scattered notes at the back, and then that becomes like the basis for my syntopicon. So I'm able to hunt ideas
That's
from
what
it.
C.S.
So
Lewis did too. Yeah.
wait, really?
Yeah. So he
Wow.
would do that in a lot of his books. He would make more notes, more marginal notes, kind of like I'm doing. But then he would say you can't read a book once. So I'm
Yep.
not sure if he was doing that the first time or not. But then he's flipping to the back and he's writing exactly what you're describing, which helps. It helps you further. It helps you later on as well. So even if
Yeah,
you're not
totally.
writing a paper on this or a Substack piece, it's helping future you come back and understand the book better and remember and recall. And yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
that's awesome.
Yeah. Let's see. Here we go. What are your current opinions on Stoicism? Focused journaling. I wonder, I'm not sure if I understand this one. Does it mean Stoic? Like, is it a type of focused journaling? Stoic focused journaling?
I've never heard of it. Maybe we're
Uh,
just
we're
not
out of the loop. We could be out of the loop.
we're
Maybe
not
I'd
that
like to.
cool.
That's right. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on Stoicism in general?
uh I don't know enough about it to talk about it.
Mm.
From what I know, it's Marcus Aurelius. I read it at a time when I didn't understand anything about philosophy.
Hmm.
So it was like when I read it, it's like, okay, no, it's time to start taking cold showers and start to like just repress all my emotions. So
Yeah.
I don't know a ton about Stoicism. I haven't read enough Seneca or
Hmm.
like any of the other Stoics. I have a very like prosaic understanding of Stoicism. So yeah, I think I'm
Good.
out of the loop. I think our audience is a lot cooler than us.
Yeah. Well, so I think maybe what they're thinking is, oh man, I have his book somewhere. Like daily Stoic type journaling, journal like Marcus Aurelius. I'm gonna come up. I'm gonna make a video on that eventually. Yeah, his meditations. It just so everyone knows that is Roman Stoicism. It does have a
Mm,
different flavor than the original, and that's fine, whatever. But for me, I'm kind of a bro, so like I like Stoic principles, but I never really had that. I have a masculinity crisis because I'm a millennial. That's why.
mm,
But I also wrestled, so I'm okay with some of that. I
yeah.
feel okay handling myself, whatever. I feel okay about my self identity, but not great because everyone jacked us up. But Stoicism, kind of like some of the same principles from the wisdom tradition of the wrestling community that I've inherited. So that's been cool. One interesting thing I think I found about Stoicism is that um, in the system of Stoicism back in the day, they thought everything was corporeal, so they thought God existed, but God is kind of nature, and
Mm,
there's this logos principle that underlies everything and exerts providence over reality. And they were determinists, so everything is physically determined outside of you. That's why you not necessarily repress your emotions, but you choose to not act on them because everything outside of you is outside of your control anyways, and it's all predetermined. And so if that's the case, then don't let it bother you. However, if you're a corporeal being and you don't have a immaterial soul, then it looks like to me all your actions and volitions and emotions are subject to your neurochemistry and not necessarily you. And so it's like, what do you mean choose not to act on my emotions? If
mm,
everything else, if everything in reality is determined, everything is physically determined, and I'm a wholly physical being, why aren't my actions and decisions also physically determined by prior laws and events? And so I think that is a tension in Stoicism.
mm,
You could get past that by saying, fine, I'm a substance dualist, or by saying everything is not actually physically causally determined, that you lose some of the impetus for why you would be a Stoic in the first place, because Stoics thought the Logos is controlling everything. So
mm.
It's Ryan Holiday. There we go. Thanks.
No, Ryan
There we go.
Holiday's amazing.
Ryan Holiday is sad now because I couldn't remember his name. Yeah.
Ryan Holiday's great.
Yeah, I'm sure he's sad at us not or me not remembering him. Yeah, he
I
is
think
great.
one of my favorite nonfiction books is Ego's the Enemy.
Yeah, I haven't read
And
it
it
yet.
really,
I mean, I have it, but
yeah, I listened to that book like 4 times, and I bought the copy. I just think
wow.
it was so well written and well researched, and yeah,
I mean, and I'm sure some people like try to poo-poo him or something, but I know a lot of academic philosophers, and some of those who are doing work on philosophy are like, yeah, Ryan Holiday stuff's really good. So if that's any consolation for anyone out there, scholars think he's good too. So
read them.
Read them, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna double click on the notion of like self,
sure,
because I don't know much about Stoicism, but like the way that I like this never sat well with me with Stoicism, which is like the aspect of not necessarily repressing your emotions, but the kind of illusory control that you think you have over your emotions. I think this was informed by my kind of extensive meditation practice experiences. I started meditating when I was 14. And then it was like a windy journey of discovering different traditions, and then now landing on a kind of like this principle, like a meditation method that I have for myself. Like it's got its basis in Vipassana, which has a huge focus on observing yourself as your act. And it has something to do with like observing your emotions, because you don't get to control your emotions, but you have a choice in how you like in how you resolve and dissolve this emotion through observation.
Yeah.
So I think it's a different, like it's an Eastern lens of looking at this entire problem. And I think especially with my recent took a crack at karate, it's the same principle. It's like you observe and smile through the pain, so to speak. My sensei would always say, like you would like put yourself in a state of discipline, be as precise as possible, but then always observe the pain so that it dissolves itself. So
I like that principle. I discovered that. I remember where I was stopped at a train, and it was after wrestling practice, and I tore or maybe it was after a wrestling tournament. I tore a ligament in my thumb, and it was killing me. It hurt so bad. And I just remember being like, if I try to focus on where that pain is, it kind of dissipates because it's not precise. And maybe it's less spiritual, but the principle is the same of like, I'm trying to focus on that, and then it kind of dissipates because you can't really focus on it. It's a bunch of dispersed nerves. So that was fun. So we got a comment here. So Jedi are Stoic. Maybe, right? They may be more like Buddhist. But there's a lot of great stuff written on Buddhism and Stoicism and the interrelation. And actually, Robin, like you were saying, I think a lot of the more scholarly Stoics are going to say they're going to interpret the ancient Stoics as doing more of what you're talking about, of saying, look, you can't really maybe you can't even control your emotions and stuff it down. That's more Broicism, maybe. But true, I
love that.
Yeah, that's not original to me, but the Stoics would say like control your actions, right, and seek to be a virtuous person who, when those emotions come up, you're not acting in a vicious way, but in a virtuous way. So it really does depend on who you ask and what you're reading.
Totally, yeah.
I think the Jedi are probably wrong in their philosophy. I don't think I don't think the Sith are right either. But
I think it's the thing. It's like as you get older, you're like, maybe the Jedis are wrong. You start to see like what's going on here. This is like a cult with like a corrupt internal administrative system.
That's right. And their detachment from love, I think, is what gets things in trouble. This is like a common Christian critique of some forms of Buddhism that say like, I want to cut off all my desires. And it's like, well, when are you going to cut off that desire? And on the popular level, whatever. But taking that idea and applying that, man, if love is pretty integral to the human experience and what we desire and long for, and you're just saying like, I'm cutting that off and I'm not going to seek that, even if I have those desires, it's like, yeah, you're going to probably be pretty twisted because your desire is going to get warped into something else as you try to repress them. So I think look at what happened with Darth Vader because his love was being repressed and all this stuff.
Exactly.
So,
and also is like a real life example, Osho. with that entire cult going up. So he was like a
Okay.
spiritual leader that got busted for starting a cult. So
Nice.
it's basically like hardcore spiritual principles and hardcore like practices at his ashram. And
Yeah.
then later on, they discovered that he's got like Rolls Royces and sports cars, parked behind. So he's using all the money for like
Yeah.
personal gains. So I think that's another aspect of like whatever you repress persists. And yeah, in relation to love, I think there's an aspect of like especially in meditation, there's this idea of like once you've dissolved the sense of self, you're able to perceive love as like universal love.
Mm-hmm.
So you have compassionate love for everything. It's not like a localized love,
Mm-hmm.
but what most people don't realize is how you virtually don't get there in decades. Like that takes like serious commitment.
Mm.
And it's I think with the Jedis, the renunciation of love always produces bad results because you're not there yet. You're not
Yeah.
at the point where you could renounce it.
That's interesting. Wow, that is an interesting aspect of things. I wrote a paper recently that I presented at this conference on the philosophy of technology in Heidegger and the Jedi and the Sith, and how I used to really hate Heidegger, and I get so mad when my professors would assign him. But now I'm like, he might have been right about the philosophy of technology. And in Heidegger, at least in his philosophy of technology, he has two ideas. One's called challenging forth and one's called bringing forth. And so someone who's bringing forth something would be bringing, it's all about his attention, and it's kind of phenomenology, but maybe not. But it's like using a stick as a walking stick is very natural. It's already in that shape, and it fits naturally. You're going along the grain of reality using a one of those old school mills where the water would churn the big wheel and that would power your mill. It's like that you're going with the flow of the water. You're not changing the direction or anything like that. You're bringing something forth. You're using technology in accordance with nature and how nature operates on its own. Challenging forth is when you dam up the whole river and you make it into a canal, you canalize it, make it straight, and it's way faster. And then you dammed it up and you completely change the topography because of this, or stripping something down to its basic elements and then rebuilding it back. And Heidegger says eventually you challenge yourselves forth. That process gets away from you. And then it leads to his technological determinism, which I'd probably disagree with. But the Sith are using technology as their technology is the Force. It's their magic system, and they try to break the Force and use it to do Sith lightning and stuff like that. Where the Jedi at least are living more peace and harmony with the Force and the flow of the Force. So I think they're right about technology use, their magic or whatever. But yeah, man, sorry to take
Star Killer base.
Yeah, that's right. Here we go. We got our first super chat here. Trees of Arden. Just finished my MFA in directing, so I'm curious. Any thoughts on the intersection of philosophy and theater, or is it theatrical history? Maybe. Regular viewer of both of you. What do you think?
I had 1 year of theater in my undergrad, so I think I'll just go off of that. There's a ton of theory written on theater studies. For example, like theater of cruelty, the principle of alienation. If you're into Samuel Beckett, I think his plays call into some fundamental questions about like, his plays is so minimal, which opens up the margins for interpretation. Intersection of philosophy and theater. Like I'm having trouble parsing that question.
Yeah.
Like what kind of intersection? Are we talking about performance theory, or is it about like the history of theater? But like if you're really talking about the history of theater, even the Greeks have a ton of like philosophy of theater. You know, Aristotle's Poetics is one of the first sort of studies of the theatrical form and epic poems. So in there he identified tragedy and he identified comedy and he identified principles of a theatrical composition to create a certain effect in a viewer. But then later on you're going to have like you can have like theater of cruelty is a really good one to look into. And then you have like alienation, a lot of I'm gonna butcher this. Brecht, like Brechen theater. It's like Mud of Courage.
Yeah,
like that series of
we got
plays.
that here. There you
Yeah,
go.
Brecht,
Yeah,
whatever it is. Yeah.
yeah.
And yeah, no, I think it's I'm not a theater major, but I have kind of directed amateur plays
Hmm.
in my first year in theater, and then seeing how the play gets written, from which perspective, what do we keep? What
Yeah.
do we negate? So I recently went and saw a Shakespeare adaptation where it's just one woman sitting there with a bunch of kitchen appliances acting out Romeo and Juliet. So I'm just wondering what kind of theory um and sort of design decisions go into that. And with the tricky part, something tricky with theater is kind of like writing a novel. You can explicate the principles behind it, but at the end of the day, if the play is badly performed, if the play is like badly put together,
Hmm.
it just wouldn't have an effect on the audience.
Yeah.
And I think Beckett, especially for Waiting for Godot or Happy Days, he has very strict stage instructions. He wants the audience to feel that kind of dread, or
Mm.
music should play here. There should only be one tree in the entire stage set of Waiting for Godot. And so I think there's a bunch of theory written like between the lines of those plays, and I'm sure a lot of people have theorized about like 20th century theater or even Greek theater, but the overlap, it's just too broad. Are we talking
Mm.
about the history,
Mhm.
or are we talking about like the philosophy behind it, behind a form called theater?
Yeah, I think you did a great job there, giving
Yeah.
us some insights. So I've just two. One's philosophical, one's theological. So
Mm,
um, in theater nowadays, we have something called the soliloquy, and it's a self. It's just one person giving kind of a
mhm,
monologue or talking to themselves. It's like a monologue where you're talking to yourself. And the term was actually coined by Augustine, Saint Augustine.
mm,
He wrote a series of 4 dialogues, and they were more like Cicero than they were like Plato. From what I've read, I'm still researching it for my book. But his 4th one was a soliloquy, and he coined the term because he's talking with himself and he personifies reason as a person that he's talking with. And I really like this because this is kind of what good analytic philosophers do, where they'll try and build up an argument and then they're kind of talking with themselves saying, does this argument work? Why would it not work? Well, because the argument's a little bit weak here. And what if this happened? And you are kind of dialoguing with yourself in your head.
mm,
Augustine just put it on paper, and he's talking about the nature of the self, and he wants to know what is he, and he wants to talk about the nature of God. And so he personifies himself. And I keep a journal of soliloquies. So that's a philosophical soliloquy. After that, it went into the theater, and now we have, it's a more technical term in theater, but I'm trying to bring it back in the philosophical world to say, like, we can do this. I wrote down a note earlier
mm,
that you were talking about your meditation and you're kind of observing the self. For me, this is something that's really helpful, is just asking myself questions and trying to answer it um,
mhm,
in a little bit more of an objective way, which I do by personifying my reason, like Augustine did, and just saying, like, why do I always give the key example because it's probably my best soliloquy is, why do I like bad guys so much? How come
mm.
why do I like Gaston in Beauty and the Beast? Like, what the heck? The bad guy who's like jacked and he can break a belt on his neck just by flexing. But I like Moriarty with Sherlock Holmes. I love that
I
character
love
so much.
Moriarty.
He's the
Yeah.
best. Every
Mm,
rendition of him is fantastic.
mm.
Um,
Yeah,
there's more.
Andrew Scott in the BBC was it
Yeah, fantastic.
BBC Sherlock? Yeah,
Crazy.
it's
My favorite of
great.
all time is, I always forget the actor's name, but the Robert Downey Jr.
Ah,
adaptation.
yep.
Like, I
Mm,
just love. I think it's perfect. But anyway, so I ask myself, like, why do you like this? Could it be because of this, or what about this, or this? And it's a way
mm,
to help yourself gain self knowledge, which is so rare and hard to come by. But you
mhm.
are writing it on the page instead of just thinking it in your head, and so you do have to be a little bit more objective with yourself. You're about to write it down.
Totally.
What do you really think about this? And you can be as hard or as mean as you want to yourself. Don't be mean to yourself. But you know, probe the depths by helping yourself do that. And maybe you hit a stalemate and you can't get any further. That's fine.
Yeah,
You need friends and talk with them as well. You know.
totally. Yeah,
But
and I
yeah.
think this is a core pleasure of writing. I don't know. Like I've done some amateur fiction in the past. Like
Mm.
none of them were any good, but now it's like writing fiction is just kind of like what I keep for myself.
Yeah.
Um, so my therapist actually told me there's something called schema therapy,
Hmm.
and it's all about bringing awareness to your patterns of behavior.
Interesting.
And then so there are these archetypes like the punitive parents or the wounded child and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I found a way to personify that in a series of like characters or dialogue. So
Yeah.
essentially, when I write a short story for myself, it would start with a broken, like wounded child as an archetype.
Yeah.
And it would go through this revelation where it's just different parts of me speaking with each other.
Oh,
It's kind of
yes.
schizophrenic when you think about it. It's like, how could you have two people at once? But my therapist actually encouraged me to do this, which is like personify different parts of yourself, examine how you speak with yourself, because that's a large part of, that's a larger part of therapy work, which is changing your internal dialogue.
Yeah.
And then as you have that communication happening, you can see that explicated in a story form. And then one of the ways that I used to process like really bad breakups is I just write a short story about it, and it kind of alleviates that internal thing that's going on.
Yeah.
It's like no one has to read these stories, but it's just
Exactly.
like it helps to have it laid out, explicated.
I love that. So
Mm.
I think someone who did that actually was Boethius in his Consolation of Philosophy. It's a Augustinian soliloquy. Boethius is in jail, wrongfully imprisoned, and eventually killed. But he was also a genius. So he had all these quotes in his head that he's just in jail for writing one of the best books of the Western tradition. And he's talking to Lady Philosophy, who is his version of the personified reason, but he's still giving more of a story than Augustine would, because he's still making it more into a short story kind of feel. And I love that, man. So I do that with my own science fiction. When I'm trying to understand something, I'll personify it. And so that's one of the chapters that I'm writing is on the soliloquy and the dialogue for self-knowledge, just like you're
That's
doing.
so good.
So
Yeah.
it's cool, man. Hopefully it'll be helpful to people, but I'm so glad to hear that you have been helped by that. And I'm gonna look up that schema theory as well. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Let's see. We got a bunch. Thanks for the super chat. That's awesome.
Thank you.
We got a bunch coming in. It's hard to find them all. Let's see. Here's one about theology. Can you give us a background on your career as a theologian?
You can
yeah.
take this.
I'll go super quick.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I was a autodidact for like 4 or 5 years. I didn't want to go to seminary. All my Christian friends were like, "You're into theology, go study it." And I was arrogant. I was really proud. I like knowing more than the people who were studying at seminary. It made my ego big. It felt great. Oh, I read more than you. Haha. And I always said, like, if God wants to pay for it, then I'll go. And then I met my wife. We got engaged, which is my girlfriend. We got engaged and found out that once we get married, she actually worked at the seminary I wanted to do work at. And they're like, yeah, we'll give you a free degree because your wife's worked here for so long. She worked there for like 5 years already. So I was like, I guess God is paying for it. So I went and did something like 85 credit hours in 3 years and crushed it. But it was because of my commonplace books and compendiums. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah. So after that, I got into philosophical theology and did a master's in philosophy, and that's that. Yeah, still doing it right now. I need to be on behind, but I need to be writing a paper for a book on theology and Warhammer 40K. So that's going to be really fun. I'm excited to do
just
that.
to double click on that question. So I virtually grew up as an atheist, and then like now it's getting to the point where I'm trying to find a way into theology. I'm trying to like know more about it, because it's like at least atheists, they have this straw man of religion as this kind of like atrocities in the past, or is like all of it is just stories made up. But I'm like, is that so? And I'm like, is that really so? So I'm in a sense like looking for ways to get into the study. And then here's a funny story. I have a bitter taste in my mouth with regards to like scripture reading, because I accidentally stumbled into the Jehovah's Witness kind of sector of things. So I had a friend in my primary school class. He's like, "Oh yeah, like this Bible study thing's amazing," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that sounds really interesting." And I was like, "Would love to go to Bible classes every Sunday." And then it turned out like he was a Jehovah's Witness. And then and my mom clocked it straight away, because she's got that like kind of spider sense of like, bit of Eastern European spider sense.
Oh, okay.
And she kicked all of them out of our house when we were doing a Bible study thing. And then ever since then, I'm just like, there's this kind of skepticism that arises, but now I'm really into like the way I see it now, I cannot complete an education, for example, in a Western canon,
Yeah.
if I didn't read the Bible, if I didn't know any theology. So
Yeah.
what's the best way for someone
Dude.
like me to get into it?
Someone like you. Okay, so listeners, I'm not gonna give all the listeners the same recommendation, but because of
Mm,
who you are, Kevin Van Hooser, I wrote my master's thesis under him and defending his position, but I can't remember the name of the book right now. Remythologizing theology.
got it.
Remythologizing theology. It is dense and crazy, but you love this stuff, dude. And so
I love it.
he did his dissertation on Paul Ricoeur, and he wrote
I
like
love Paul Ricoeur.
he was
Yeah.
like an expert on it. He worked at he was in Scotland at that I'm losing all the names right now, and I would look so awesome if I could rattle them off. Edinburgh, and the philosophy department would bring him in when they were talking about Ricoeur because he was like one of the world's experts on Ricoeur. On top of that, he's just the way he writes is the style that you like. He wrote a book on Derrida and deconstructionism, and he actually understood it and actually got a bunch of flack because he was defending it more than some of the evangelicals he worked with that didn't want him to do that. They just wanted him to tear him down. So that book's awesome, and it actually brings me back to my second point about theater and theology. So Van Hooser has this model of God. Different theologians are going to have different views of God, different models of God, and he says God is like an author. And God relates to his creation in a similar way that an author relates to their creation. And he calls it theodrama. So he uses
Wow.
more of a play than I would use. I would use a story or a novel. He would say a play. And
Theodrama.
yeah, theodrama is pretty
Wow.
epic. But
That's so good.
and he actually lives it. This is one of the cool things about him. I was in his class, and he's like, every day I wake up and I tell myself I'm a character in a story, and I'm gonna play my part well. Not that I'm someone else, but this is the character that God's given me to play, and I'm going to live up to that. It's actually similar to Marcus Aurelius reminding himself in the morning, hey, today you're going to deal with people who are mean and vicious and evil, and they're like this because they don't have knowledge. So be respectful, be kind, be courteous. Something to set the tone in the morning. So
Oh, I love that.
I love the idea of thinking of reality as God is like an author. We're like his characters in the story, and it does kind of help with some of the problem of evil type stuff. Why is there evil in the world? And it's like, well, why did Tolkien have Smeagol becoming Gollum? Like, well, because you need a protagonist. Well, yeah, but we live in this real world. Well, you need to overcome, like you were talking about earlier, in order to have your self-concept, you need to overcome something and set yourself diametrically opposed to evil and such. So there's a lot to there, dude. I don't want to nerd out too much because I wrote one of my master's theses on this.
We can go on
We
for
could
4
talk
hours.
forever. Yeah, dude, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I think you're gonna love that, but I actually hope you can find some time to read it because I think you'll go
Sure,
nuts
yeah.
for
I
it.
wrote it down in my notes. And then there's one more thing, like no, it just totally escaped me. Never mind.
Okay.
Moving
Yeah,
on.
if it comes back, we'll do it. Let's see. Here's one. Again, there's some of these are theology stuff. Christian, Catholic, or something different. So I'm personally an evangelical Christian, and I know that's like, that's scary. I mean evangelical in the even pre-Protestant sense of the word, which means like I'm about the evangelion. I'm about the gospel, the good news of Christ. There are other things that track with American evangelicalism that I also do believe, but first and foremost, I'm like a person of the book of the Bible, and the gospel is central to me. So
Beautiful.
yeah, that'll make sense to some people, and some people that's fine. Let's see who else. Yeah, so people have entered in again, and some people have left. We are taking you guys' questions, so drop those in the comments, and then we are prioritizing the super chats, especially because you can see them. It's easier. Got a lot of comments, a lot of questions. Dude, let me ask you one here.
Sure.
How are you doing personally with the infinite scroll and scrolling?
Oh my God.
Are you successfully avoiding it, or is it catching you as well?
Oh my God. No, I have to set up parameters to like not do it.
Hmm.
I made a recent video about this. I did manage to cut down 80% of my screen
I
time,
saw that, man. Yeah,
and
that's
I
cool.
think the key thing that really made a difference for me was Screen Zen, the app. They're a free app, so there's no kind of like affiliation involved. It's just a really, really good like ad blocker thing.
Yeah.
So the principle here is not like you shouldn't just cut it out completely,
Yeah.
but I allow myself like 40 minutes or maybe like 30 minutes a day just to like indulge, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like the funny thing is that the more I kind of scroll, the more ridiculous it becomes.
Hmm.
And I feel like there's such a discourse going on, which is like scrolling bad. You should be doing something with your life.
Hmm.
But I'm like, that guilt's not helping anybody. You're
No.
just gonna feel worse. And
Mhm.
that bad feeling needs to be complemented with another session of scrolling. So I think that's the doom scrolling cycle. It's not
Yeah.
like you can't control yourself or you don't have anything better to do. It's just the guilt makes you feel bad. And to remedy that feeling of feeling bad, you need to scroll more. So that's where the infinite scroll like cycle comes from. So what I would recommend is we need to resolve the guilt before you even get to quitting scrolling in the first place,
Hmm.
which means something from my meditation practice, a motto is awareness alone is curative. So if you observe something for long enough, for example, I had a stint of drinking in college. Who didn't have a stint of drinking in
Mhm.
college? And I would like drink every night, and then sometimes like I would drink so much over the weekend, like come Monday, I couldn't even get out of bed to go to class. Um, but yeah, that was a stint. And then like when I realized I was taking 2 vodka shots before I went to bed, I was like, there's a problem here. That is a problem.
Mhm.
And then what eventually started happening is I try to like wrestle myself. Okay, I can only drink after 6. It's like that's a rule. But whenever I set a rule, I always find a way to break it.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's not going to work because the guilt makes me feel bad, and
Mhm.
feeling bad needs drink to remedy that. So eventually, what started happening, I just started paying close awareness to how I was feeling when I did go on a binge or when I did do something crazy after I've kind of texted an ex or like did
Yeah.
something incredibly dumb after
Sure.
I've had a few drinks. But over time, those bad patterns as they start to play out, your brain kind of figures something out. If you don't judge yourself, it's like that's really fucking stupid.
Mm.
Like I didn't know why I was doing that. And then over time, like the problem kind of resolved itself.
Mhm.
I'm sure it's very different for like proper alcoholics. I just merely had a rough patch of my life where I just needed that kind of self therapy work. So I now virtually ever since I got my driver's license, I haven't had a drink in a month,
Hmm.
and then it's been a really sustainable thing. So I kind of resolved that habit through that kind of close self excuse me, couldn't talk, need more coffee. Self-observation.
Yeah.
So the same with scrolling because it got so bad, I think back in 2024 that I was spending like 3 hours a day because I'm a creator.
Yeah.
I make Instagram
You
reels,
can
right?
you can justify
Yeah,
it. We can justify it forever.
we
Yeah.
can
This is
justify
part
it's
of our
like
job. Yeah.
exactly. No,
Yeah.
I'm doing market research. I'm
Right.
looking at what works on Instagram or
Yep.
what works on YouTube. And then I'd always feel so grossed out because it's like I haven't learned anything. My
Yeah.
mind feels like it's in like 10 million different directions. And then I think it really started to take a toll when I was in London. I was preparing for a TEDx talk in
Yeah.
Oxford. And then I just found myself like I was alone in a foreign city. Everyone talked kind of funny there. The food is bad. And I just sat in my bed and I just scrolled for 3 hours. And then that was like the election cycle. So there's all this crazy discourse
Yeah.
going on coming from
Yeah.
both sides. And I
Sure.
was just like kind of stuck in the middle. I was like, this is like the world's gonna end. Like tomorrow a nuke could drop, could drop in England and we're all gonna die. And then when I clocked that, I'm like, oh, this is what it's doing to your brain.
Hmm.
And then gradually that awareness over the problem like kind of started unraveling this habit.
Hmm.
And now it's just like now I just view it as a preference. Would I rather feel better after reading a few pages of a novel I like? Or would I rather feel shit? So it's perfectly fine if you honestly want to feel like shit.
Hmm.
But I think it's just that awareness over how much damage it's causing. But without that awareness, you can't begin to address this problem because you're gonna get into that cycle of guilt and backsliding, and it
Yeah.
never ends.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's wise, man. I go through seasons of it, and I've talked about this in my channel a lot, where I have to give myself a positive thing in its place, and so I carry a pocket commonplace book with me, where I'm like, this thing has my favorite wise sayings from everywhere. I find them wherever I find them. There's a lot of philosophers, but there's also like Star Wars, the Clone Wars, and
Mm,
Master Shifu and stuff. And it's just like I would much rather work on memorizing those, but also ponder them and chew on those.
mm,
And then thirdly, I don't want to go to it for comfort. When when I sh if I'm in line or something, I can
mm.
talk to people. I'm okay. Like, I'm a personable guy. If I have an
Yeah.
excuse not to and everyone else is doing it fine, then I won't do it. But I'm like, "No, I actually do like talking with people. So let me not do that." I can if I really need some kind of fix, I'll pull out my pocket commonplace book, and I'll just look at 1 or 2 proverbs. It's not like you can thumb
Mm.
through those the same way that you can thumb through the infinite scroll. And then
No,
I'm
yeah.
priming myself with those. I'm thinking about them, chewing on them, but then I'm back to looking at the reality that I'm living in.
Mm,
And so that is kind of helpful. I like what you said about observing things, and that's kind of what I'm doing with soliloquies and trying to talk myself out of some things.
mm,
Just having to argue with myself about it is really helpful,
mm.
because I'm trying to be someone who's trying to help me as well. And yeah,
Self-help.
yeah, literally, literally, and it may be kind of schizophrenic, right?
Yeah, no, it's great,
But
but
we're all doing that anyways. We're all
yeah.
arguing with ourselves in the shower or whatever. Yeah.
So I think recently I got this thing, and
Yeah.
I think it completely changed my life. Say what you will about Kindle, you
Mhm.
can't own books on here technically. I know
Jared
they're
Henderson's
copyright.
gonna come in here and beat us up, dude.
I know, but
I
I
love
might
Jared.
switch to Kobo. I might switch to Kobo later on for like
Okay.
whatever capabilities. But the how I'm thinking about it is there a form factor that allows me to switch? So can I have a scroll session on this thing instead of
Hmm.
a phone?
Yeah.
So now I downloaded all sorts of like easy to read nonfiction books. I'm reading Malcolm Gladwell's Outlier right
Yeah.
now
Sure.
because it's just I both want to have a specialized knowledge in literary theory, but at the same time, I want to know what other people are reading. So Malcolm Gladwell, Steven Pinker, and all that kind of popular contemporary stuff. It's just like it keeps me in the loop, and these books are very easy to read compared to some of the junk that we're reading.
Oh my gosh,
It's
man.
yeah,
Yeah. When you go to
and
those,
it's
you're
just
like,
like
this is what other people are reading. Holy cow,
yeah,
this is fun.
and then
Yeah.
it's like so fun. It's like, oh
Mhm.
my god, the writing is accessible, the storytelling is great.
Yeah.
Doesn't scratch the itch. Doesn't quite scratch the itch, but it's kind of
Yeah.
the same as a scrolling session. So
Mm.
I would, in the past few weeks, I've probably read like 2 books already in a week, just by switching to this kind of like
Yeah.
I'll read 5 pages whenever I have the urge to get on my phone, and
Interesting.
it's been really fantastic.
Yeah. That's awesome. Here's a question about East versus West. So what's your opinion on the
Mm,
Western canon? Do you think it's warranted to separate the Western from the Eastern, when the Old Testament is technically Eastern? So
mm.
maybe, yeah. Well, what do you think about the Western canon? You're a Mortimer Adler guy. So am I. He's come under some attack for the books he's included in the great books of the Western tradition. Um, do you have any thoughts on East versus West, man? I mean, you have some Eastern heritage yourself, so
Oh,
you could
absolutely.
be the guy to tell us here.
Yeah, I'm a mix between I'm a mix of Chinese and of Russian and Chinese heritage, so I got all the East in me. But
That's
anyway,
great. That's great.
but the thing with the East, there's never a conception of a canon.
Mm,
That's the fundamental difference. I think the
int
Western distinctions of setting boundaries, that's a distinctive
hmm,
Western way of viewing things. And then actually a lot of Eastern teachings are co-opted into the West because they bound them into books and this and that without realizing that, for example, Confucianism is so ingrained in Chinese culture that a lot of the idioms and proverbs that we use are just like a part of the language and a
yeah,
part of the culture. So culture and what you read and the sort of material that you engage with are sort of one and the same. There's a kind of fuzzy boundary, and you can observe this in Japanese architecture as well. There's no notion of the inside and the outside.
hmm,
These boundaries are essentially blurred. And Western, like Eastern art, for example, there's this concept in Chinese painting, which is called xianzhang, which
yeah,
means stamping, right?
mhm,
So in ancient China, if you were to buy a painting, it's like one of those scroll paintings where you paint a mountain or something. Um, actually, it's viewed as a virtue, or the painting would go up in value if you stamp it with your own stamp and write your commentaries on a painting. That's why
Wow.
if you look at a lot of the scroll paintings, they're layered with like jokes, poetry, and different stamps, and
Huh.
they actually go up in value because it shows the lineage of a co-creation of a piece of art
Hmm.
instead of like one single genius creating a kind of fixed boundary around a certain piece of art. So I think the first distinction here is Eastern canon is a Western imposition upon whatever it is,
Yeah.
and this idea of like there are fixed boundaries of what is good and what is bad. Actually, like this relates to like the idea of like high and low art. Like in Eastern culture, especially Japanese haikus, poetry is seen as a composition of play. You
Hmm.
use poetry to amuse people. It's a communal act of like let's delight and amuse each other. But whereas in the West, if you read Keats or Wordsworth, it's like one singular author, my imagination,
Yeah.
and then
Creative
it's
genius. Yeah.
creative genius, a sense of passion behind a rhyme. So yeah, that's the main difference. And other than that, um, I think there's value in knowing a Western canon, and I think you got to have a base to work off of in order to judge other things.
Hmm.
And this comes from like a close reading background. Like you wouldn't, for example, I'm rather lucky to have taken a lot of courses and classes in like the Western canon.
Yeah.
You know, the first class we read Hamlet and Jane Austen, and then so it's really good to have an understanding of what is the canon before you can break it. And the danger here is to assume that the canon's bad and to engage in somewhat of a paranoid reading, so you judge it before you read it.
Yeah.
So that's my conception of the canon, and I think
It's helpful.
yeah.
That's super helpful. I think we were talking about the aphorisms and proverbs being absorbed into the culture itself. I think that we have some of those in the West. Cogito ergo sum. That
Mm,
makes it in there. Thanks to science fiction, a lot of the philosophical concepts get in there. But we do that a lot with the Bible as well. And so folks who are like, "Hey, I am an ardent atheist," or whatever, reading the Bible can also just help you understand what's going on in
mm.
Western society. So thinking about calling someone a Nimrod, it's like it means you're dumb. You're a Nimrod, right?
That's
Have you heard
so
that
good.
before, Robin? Have you
No,
heard
I
Nimrod?
have. Yeah.
Yeah. So calling someone a Nimrod is traced back to Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny
Whoa.
called Elmer Fudd a Nimrod, but he was doing it. He was mocking him. Nimrod
Mm,
was a great warrior, a great hunter from the Bible. And so if you didn't, we don't have any biblical, we're biblically illiterate, most of us today. So we're like, yeah, he's calling him dumb because it sounds kind of funny too. You Nimrod. But he's saying, oh, you're Nimrod. It'd be like calling someone Arnold Schwarzenegger who's not very strong. Like, okay, Arnold,
wow.
settle down. But it got twisted because American culture didn't quite get it because we're in this
Nimrod.
this transitionary
Yeah.
period. He was saying Nimrod was a great warrior, a great hunter, sorry, and Elmer Fudd's a bad hunter, so he was mocking him. So little
Ah.
things like that are all shot throughout culture, and so it's just like, yeah, I want to commend people, go and read the book because it's one of the pillars of the West,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
in thinking of the canon comes from the Bible. It was
Mm,
the canon of Scripture, which books are in and which books are out, and then that understanding of the canon, which started with Scripture, has spread out to the canon of the Western tradition, to the canon of Star Wars, which books are in, which movies are in, which are
mm,
out, and the West is kind of obsessed with categorizing and canonization. Maybe not
totally.
as much Americans, we do it weird because we're pragmatists here, but,
Yep.
I mean, talk to a German and they're like, "We are gonna categorize everything and we'll smash a bunch of words together to describe it."
Volkswagen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. But anyway, there's a separate point, which is like I tried for the longest time to read Paradise Lost,
yeah.
John Milton. The
Yep.
poetry is fantastic, but
Mhm.
half of the time I'm like, what the fuck is going on?
Mm,
So I'm like, I think I need to re-engage with like the scriptures, make a pretty serious study out of it,
yeah.
because I think it's the key to unlock a lot of stuff that's seemingly confusing.
Mhm.
Like even with Dante, for example, you
Yeah,
can't really understand what's going on in Dante without a understanding of the Bible.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it'll help unlock because, you can also read the critiques of stuff like that, where you're like, where Dante misinterpreted this, and here's why:
Mm,
because he was working off of this textual tradition, and he didn't have the ones that we found later. And so
mm,
he's thinking this biblical concept means this, but we have older manuscripts that actually are saying it's more like this. And so it's just really fun to get in this web of saying like, holy cow,
mm,
I understand why he wrote that. So if you didn't know that, you'd be like, what an idiot. What, he just made this up? And you're like, no, this is one of the smartest men in all history.
mm,
He was working with different sources, and here's what he was thinking with it. So it's
mm.
just I love pulling the thread on that stuff, man. Yeah, that's fascinating.
So good.
Maybe let's take one more here.
Wow, time
Mm,
flied, huh?
yeah, seriously, man, we're going all over the place. I knew we'd be
Oh
able to
wow,
go everywhere. We
pull
were,
something off.
yeah, we're just like scratching
Yeah.
the surface here too. I think this may be fascinating because we're going to think about this differently. Um,
Mm,
I love. I did not like continental philosophy for a long time, and I've really
mm,
actually grown to enjoy it and like it. And I'm trying to get more continentally minded folks on my channel. And so I think you are doing philosophy. I think you're doing it from a different perspective than I'm doing
mm.
in literary theory and literary studies and stuff like that. So, in your mind, what do you think of when you think of philosophical thinking?
I'm gonna rave off of I'm gonna ride off the back of Ellen Badu, if you
Okay.
heard of him. Um, he essentially said philosophy are pincers into the truth that can never be encapsulated fully
Mm,
into language.
hmm,
For example, they're daring acts of advancing into unknown territories, but kind of like the theory construction is the point of like of advancing into this territory, and then truth is this kind of, and philosophical institutions are knots to keep this conversation going, to defend it, because without it we can never have that kind of, so the truth here is like a unceasing trend towards unity and integration.
mm,
And I think philosophical thinking essentially means, it's like I have a pretty loose definition of it, as any continental person would. It's essentially attacking problems um, from as many perspectives as you can muster,
hmm,
like without like getting into total relativism. And then it's also I think I come from a tradition of, if you know, like I think he's one of the pre-Socratic Sextus Empiricus,
yeah.
outline of Pyrrhonism.
Hmm.
I think if I were to boil down my way of thinking about the world, it's down to kind of Pyrrhonistic kind of skepticism. It's not
Hmm.
skepticism that's like pokes holes in everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's somehow being able to develop a perspective where you're able to merge different perspectives together,
Hmm.
and then you advance into kind of systems thinking. So you
Hmm.
think of things in terms of systems. So like it's no longer like I'm right, you're wrong. It's like, what are some of the things behind what you're saying that could be interpreted as correct? So I think it's a rather kind of associative, post-structuralist way of thinking about things.
Hmm.
And then because my major fear is one day I'm going to be so certain about something that I've deducted from like whatever reason and whatever methods that I've concocted, but one day that's going to be wrong because history has shifted.
Hmm.
There's one little kind of mistake in my logic, and then I'm deathly afraid of getting into a paradigm block, which
Hmm.
is viewing the world through one angle.
Yeah.
So I think that brought a kind of radical openness to new experiences, whatever things that I can experience. And yeah, whenever people argue with me, I'm just like, oh, maybe you're correct. But that's why people never get into debates with me, because they find it so infuriating, because
Hmm.
I'm just like, oh, could be correct.
Hmm.
But also, have you considered, and then it goes on, like it's more of like an integrated discussion instead of like I'm trying to prove my point.
Yeah.
And then Pyrrhonism ultimately ends up and it's kind of like this mental quietude, because you realize that if you deconstruct your own arguments and other people's arguments, if you create this kind of cohesive discussion, like you arrive at this kind of perspective that can't be reached with one single stream of thinking,
Hmm.
and you kind of co-create something together. And then if you write that down, that inspires another chain of thinking. That's why, like, a few thousand years later, we're still talking about Plato,
Yeah.
because he opened up that open field. He used the pincers to strike at truth. And then he inspired all these discussions, and then we can use those discussions to figure out morals, to figure out how we should talk to each other. And I think yeah, and I think that's how I think of it. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I think that's great. You're sparking a lot of stuff for me. It
Mm.
sounds, I forgot how much Pyrrhonism is impacted by the Skeptical Academy.
Yeah.
I don't know to the extent that there's a direct line or not. I thought there might be, but I'm not recalling right now. Socrates went around asking everyone questions. Hey, how do you know that?
Mm.
How do you know? You're everyone says you're the wisest person around. Socrates would say to someone, "Tell me what justice is," and then he would show that the guy doesn't really know what justice is.
Mm.
Some of Plato's students would say, "We're following the tradition of Socrates by being skeptics." And not skeptics in the sense that like we don't know anything, but really being like, what do you know? Let's put it to the
Yeah.
Socratic dialogue and let's see. They got into it with Saint Augustine, and Augustine they said, Saint Augustine, what if you're mistaken about everything that you believe? And he goes, well, look, even if I'm mistaken, I still exist. So I can't be
Mm.
mistaken about my own existence. And Descartes said, oh, word, let me grab that
Wait,
and build my
wait a
whole
minute.
build my whole everything on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was just an offhand comment that Augustine flipped at the Skeptical Academy. So for me, I'm much more in the analytic tradition, but I have this kind of understanding, or I want to recapture the more ancient understanding of the philosopher as wise man or woman, as sage. I know sage it's even hard to talk about it, a sage, because it's such an elevated position. But the sage as being like the wise person, kind of the guru who will give you some wise gnomic statements, give you some aphorisms and such, but also can give you a syllogism. I do see that in Jesus. So if you were going to start with the Bible again, I would start with the book of Matthew, because
The book of Matthew. Yep.
yeah, he's giving in Matthew chapter 5, he starts the Sermon on the Mount, and it's like, hey, what if Jesus were a philosopher and went up on a mountain and told you how to live the good life? And it's like, oh, that's what he says. Blessed are the poor, blessed are poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful. And he's using this makarios Greek word instead of eudaimonia because it has a little bit of a different connotation, but it's both good. So anyways, I like the idea of integrating that the ancient view of the philosophical sage, which I think Christ fits, which I think King Solomon fits, which I think Socrates and Pythagoras fits. I love Pythagoras just so much, even though he's kind of a cult leader himself. I think he was awesome. But in my head, a philosopher is who does philosophical thinking is the community's wise person or wise sage.
Like counsel.
Yes. And so each community is each philosopher is going to look different based on their community's needs and their community's questions. And so I think that the philosopher, part of their job and their role in their own society is generating and seeking to answer life's ultimate questions. So part of their role is saying which questions matter most. So let's argue about that and let's get to that. Which ones matter most? And maybe it'll be different for this community than this community. There's probably going to be a core that's because we're all human beings. We'll probably all be interested in certain things, but where it's going to look different and it's going to be practiced different. And the practicing different, the different modes of doing philosophy will shake out based on the community's needs. So when you're seeking to answer those questions, you'll seek to do those probably in different ways based on your community's needs. So I have been taking more of a community aspect to it, but I think the philosopher ought to be able to do some of the hardcore logic stuff while also giving aphorisms and being a wise person as well. And part of the wisdom of the philosophy, the love of wisdom, is knowing what to do knowing when to give someone a wise saying and make them chew on it themselves, give them a parable and don't give them the answer to it, make them go wrestle with it. Or when do you give them a syllogism and say, if A, then B, A, therefore B. Look, it's right there. But it takes wisdom to know your audience. You know, it takes that's super duper hard to do that.
It kind of cuts into a bit of what we do as well, because it's like most of the time we want to make 4-hour lectures on whatever it is that we're reading about, but no one's going to watch it. But we need to somehow find a way to both, like you said, give away something that's wise and digestible, but at the same time have all the hardcore like concepts behind us.
Yeah.
So it's like we can give away 1% of what we know, knowing that it's going to be good for our audience.
Yeah.
But then again, like and if people really want to look for it, we can give them all the theory that's in our heads.
It's like an iceberg, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
you need that deep, like, undergirding ballast and all that. But you want to be that's what I think of an expert. An expert is someone who's, you have to keep pulling it out of them, but it's there. And it's like, man, it just keeps coming because this person really knows this stuff in and out.
And
Yeah.
I love this figures. Like, this is something I aspire to be, like maybe 10, 20 years down the road. There's still a long way to go, but it's just like someone who's an expert, but they're not an ass about it.
Oh man.
But they kind of wear learning lightly. They're like, you can have a beer with them, but then like there's a way that they think.
Mhm.
And then I've met a ton of like PhD students or whatever when I was in the academy. They're just like, there's a kind of rigidity. It's like, that's all they think about. Like, they look at a cup, it's like Heidegger, and then they go on a long rant, and you're sitting there, you're like, fuck, how long do I have to be here? But there's a special kind of person, they've read a ton, but they show up and they're like, yo, like, let's go have some fun. But in the process of having fun, in the process of associating, merely being in their presence, you're like, oh my God, this person's a remarkable person. And you learn something new from it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like an offhand quote. Maybe they're like, oh yeah, this is like, maybe they describe the weather in some special way. And you see it like in their intricate minds, some little pieces fall off and you hold on to that. You're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, this is such an amazing person. And that's how I would define like the ultimate goal of philosophical thinking is that when it starts to reform your character, when it starts to like make your life better, and then you start to rub off on other people. And I think that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah. I think that's right, man. And it's mutually beneficial. It's blessing people. You get to share what you've learned.
Absolutely.
Martha's here is a comment. We'll end on this one. In a way, they are not so arrogant, but entertainingly informative. Yeah, I think that's right. Because we're human beings. We're not just we're not just external hard drives passing information to each other, right? Robin, this has been awesome. This has been so much fun. I can't believe how fast it went.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Holy shit. It's almost 2 hours.
That's crazy. So we're planning on doing another one on Parker's Pensies, and then we'll see. Maybe we'll do one on yours too.
Sure. Yeah. I'm getting
the.
I'm gonna put myself on my Mug of Insights podcast.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, that's going to do it for now, folks. Check out Robin. It's just his name, Robin Waldun, on YouTube, or check out Mug of Insights on Substack. And I'll go back and edit the links in the description here. So that's it for now, folks. We'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks for joining us.